All right, y'all, we're back. Had a few technical glitches that last time around, trying to test some new sound equipment, which didn't seem to be working exactly right. So we're back to our old sound equipment. So hopefully you guys can still hear us all right. But I didn't even need to say all that, did I? I just admitted an error, and people wouldn't have even known about the error had I not said that. Anyway, this is Pastor's Point of View 135. Today is still August 14th, 2020. We're continuing to talk about the Great Global Reset. I think this is part 5. But we're not dealing with the Davos issue anymore. We're dealing with a lot of the other pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that are coming together. My name is Dr. Andy Woods. I'm the pastor teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church. Brother Jim, Dr. Jim, Pastor Jim McGowan is still recovering from shoulder surgery, and so folks can continue to pray for him. And so fortunately, coming off the bench is Tom Bench, who is a member of Sugarland Bible Church and has a heart for politics, worldview issues, current events. And sort of the take that we have on this is the next kingdom on the horizon is the Antichrist Kingdom. And we know that from Daniel 7, which speaks of a fourth beast that's coming. That fourth beast is going to crush and trample down the whole earth, it says, devour the whole earth. I'm in Daniel 7, verse 19, verse 23, and verse 25. And from that fourth beast will come a little horn, who we know as the Antichrist, the man of sin, the lawless one, sometimes called the beast, and he will usher in the new normal. That's a rough paraphrase. What I mean by the new normal is he will intend to make alterations in times and law. And my understanding of that is he will remove everything that society once held to and bring in his new world order. So we don't think the mindset for this can just happen in a vacuum. What we think is the stage has to be prepared for it. There has to be this sort of mindset of a new normal sweeping out the old. And we believe even this side of the rapture, we can see that. And that's sort of my summation of what's happened, not only to our country, but around the world over the last 4 months related to COVID-19. In other words, they've taken a problem and they've intentionally exploited it to bring in what I think is the greater virus, the solution to the problem. And the solution to the problem is a new society. That's why they keep talking about imagine, like after that song by John Lennon, imagine what education will be like. Imagine what defunding or redirecting money from the police departments will be like. And they keep, imagine what it would be like for mail-in voting. So they keep using this as a pretext to push society, further and further into a mold it's never known before. But it's preparatory for this new world order of the future. And what we're going to do is try, and is that how you see things related to COVID-19?
Yes.
Or would you add anything to that? And don't feel pressure like you have to add something, but some angle,
I just think that it's a deception at a degree that we've never seen before. And so for me, it really reveals how easily this becomes true. Mm-hmm. That this beast can so easily deceive the world, mm-hmm. because we see it right now.
Yeah. And I like what you said there. It reveals a deception we've never seen before. And what does Jesus say all the way through the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24? He says over and over again, be not deceived.
Right.
Implying that as we get closer and closer to the allotted time frame when the events will occur, deception will become the new normal. Correct. And it will accelerate. These prophecies of a new world order are not just found in Daniel 7. We also see them in Revelation 13, 7 and 8. Revelation 13, 16 through 18, we'll refer to those verses in just a little bit, and Revelation 17, verse 15. So here is our outline for today as we try to work through this, the Great Global Reset, Part 5. We'll look, number one, at what the global elites themselves, via the Pope or George Soros, what are they saying about COVID-19 and how they want to hijack this crisis. Number two, one of the things that's happening all over our country and all around the world is the loss of liberty. You know, as the government expands, the citizen shrinks. And then number three, a lot of folks have emailed me and asked my take on Kamala Harris, and I put here number three, President Kamala Harris, because that's what we could very well easily be ending up with here. And then number four, how does Israel fit into the whole thing, particularly in light of yesterday, where Israel entered into a historic peace treaty with the United Arab Emirates. And that will be Israel's third peace treaty. She's got one already with Egypt and Jordan, and now this is her first one from the Gulf, one of the Gulf states, the United Arab Emirates. So we're trying to get into all that today. So let's start with, of course, number one, the global elites. And, you know, to talk about global elites, you don't have to look any further than the Pope. You know, the New World Order, it's got three prongs to it, and most people don't understand this. You've got to have all three. You've got to have an economic arm, a political arm, and you have to have a religious arm. And while the Pope obviously is no expert on COVID-19, his voice is very significant because it represents a religious aspect to this whole thing.
Right.
And so he's arguing on moral grounds that COVID-19 is great. In this sense, it's moving us away from individualism, moving us away from capitalism, in other words,
right.
Pursuit of self-interest, you know, the very concepts that America was based on, and into more of a communitarianism mindset where the needs of the state or the needs of the collective outweigh those of the individual. And that's exactly what Karl Marx, you know, taught through communism, etc. So notice how the Pope now is using his voice to promote this death of individualism as the new normal. So here's an article entitled Pope Francis Uses COVID-19 Pandemic to Call for an End to Individualism. This is from the Washington Times, Cheryl Chumley, August 13th, 2020.
Okay. Pope Francis from Vatican City, in the context of speaking about the coronavirus pandemic, called on the faithful of the world to rise up, unite, and put a stop to all this, scare quote, personal and collective individualism that's going on. Just stop it, he said. Just stop this individualism nonsense right now. Well, we all knew this guy was a closet communist, right? Apparently he's coming out of the closet, dropping all pretense of tolerating nations' sovereignties, nations' rights to self-rule, and using the coronavirus pandemic as cause to call for an end to all that horrid Americanesque individualism that's been coursing around the world, interrupting globalist elitist plans to control and dominate and subjugate and so forth. Just stop it, the Pope says. Enough is enough. Quote, the pandemic, Francis said, and the Associated Press reported, has revealed how vulnerable and interconnected we all are. It's made us more aware of the spread within our societies of a false, individualistic way of thinking, one that rejects human dignity and relationships, views persons as consumer goods, and creates a throwaway culture. It's high time we all overcome our personal and collective individualism, he went on.
So here's his quote. I mean, this pandemic or plandemic has made us more aware of the spread within our societies of false individualistic ways of thinking. One that rejects human dignity and relationships, views persons as consumer goods, and creates a throwaway culture. It's high time we overcome all personal and collective individualism. So it's the death of the individual and the elevation of society and the needs of society. I mean, is that not Marxism and communism?
Right.
And so he's basically using his religious voice to argue that the Christian way forward is the end of the way America used to operate and into, corporatism, communitarianism, etc.
And he's arguing rejects human dignity. Well, I feel like a mask masks my identity, and that's my human dignity.
Mm-hmm. I don't think he wants your identity to surface. He just wants you to be one of many in number, where I can't even recognize your smile anymore.
Right.
And you were going to say something else.
No, well, just that, he purports to represent a personal God.
Mm-hmm.
And so, personal relationships are important individually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the death of the individual, the elevation of the collective. That's his religious interpretation of COVID-19. That's the great lesson we're all supposed to learn from this. That, folks, is the religious arm of the New World Order speaking.
Okay.
And George Soros gets into the act. We all know about George Soros, at least we should know about him. And here's an article from the Washington Times by Victor Morton. August 12th, Soros sees revolutionary movement in pandemic. The range of possibilities is much greater. Now, George Soros has said stuff like this before, but he recently had an interview with an Italian newspaper where he's articulated exactly the same mindset. So tell us about that article, or if you could read that to us.
Billionaire liberal activist George Soros told an Italian newspaper that he sees the coronavirus epidemic as a revolutionary opportunity. In an interview with La Repubblica, the Hungarian-born Mr. Soros also denounced President Trump as a transitory phenomenon, but expressed hope that the COVID-19 crisis has opened up politics in a radical direction. I would describe it as a revolutionary moment when the range of possibilities is much greater than in normal times, he said. What is inconceivable in normal times becomes not only possible, but actually happens. People are disoriented and scared. But Mr. Soros, who was being interviewed by the Rome newspaper on the occasion of his 90th birthday, warned that Mr. Trump remains very dangerous, despite seeing him as transitory because of his efforts to stay in power and avoid prosecution. He's fighting for his life, and he will do anything to stay in power, Mr. Soros said, also calling the president a confidence trickster who can undermine democracy from within. So I am confident that Trump will turn out to be a transitory phenomenon, hopefully ending in November, he concluded.
So Trumpism, which I guess is nationalism in his mind, he looks at as transitory, transitionary. Trump is in the way, in other words, of this New World Order, partly because Trump has made nationalistic decisions, on behalf of not Paris, on behalf of Pittsburgh, which I think is a great line that somebody in his administration invented, and they ought to be elevated to the top of the administration because of that, because it's a great marketing line.
Yeah.
And you'll notice that Soros says, if these were normal times, people wouldn't be open to these changes we want to make, but we've got them scared. And so this COVID-19 is a real opportunity to push humanity in this one world direction. We just got to get rid of Donald Trump. Now, this is not conspiracy talk. I mean, these are actually direct quotes from the global elites, Soros, or the Pope, and their take on COVID-19. This is what they're saying about it.
Right.
And of course, this reminds us very much of Rahm Emanuel's quote, which you have probably memorized by now. We've used it so many times, I hate to even keep bringing it up. But what did he say there? He's, of course, the former chief of staff under Obama. And I think he made this quote in 2009 after the financial crisis of that era. I think he's gone on. Is he still the mayor of Chicago? He went on to be the mayor of Chicago.
He was the mayor, but someone else is there now,
Okay.
because I'm seeing her quoted quite frequently. But I'm noticing in that picture it says for President-elect Obama. So he said this before they even got sworn in.
Yeah, I guess so.
You never let a serious crisis go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things you think you could not do before.
Now, in my naivete, I thought their crisis was going to be climate change. Now, they haven't let go of that one. But COVID-19 has given them an opportunity that so-called climate change, would never give them. This has put people into a state of panic and fear like very few things I've seen in my lifetime. And so people are acquiescing, to all of these changes. So this is part of the great global reset, and this is the voice of the global elites speaking. Anything you want to add to that before we switch here to number 2?
Just I was circling the words that really jumped out.
Please.
Revolutionary, radical. People are disoriented and scared. Those just leapt off the page at me. That's the way he's thinking. He's not trying to assuage those fears.
No.
So it seems to me that he's going to capitalize on them.
That's a great way of saying it, capitalize on them. Maybe that's why the Bible, I think Jesus, I can't remember how many times he said it, but he said, fear not. Why is there so much in the Bible about not being afraid? Because when we're afraid, we fall into these schemes,
Yes.
And we're more rational, when we're not emotional.
Correct.
And people are panicking, even Christians. Are hitting the panic button, and they're acquiescing to these changes. Well, for the sake of time, let's move on to the loss of liberty, individual liberty, and that's always something to monitor. When the state or the collective is exalted, the opportunities for the individual to be the individual shrink. And I found this particular article called Doctors Lay Out Plans to Punish, wow, look at that choice of words, people who refuse the coronavirus vaccine. This comes from Claire Chrétien. I think that's how you pronounce her name. Maybe you have a different pronunciation. August 11th, 2020, LifeSite News. And they're talking here about some doctors that published something in USA Today. And the reason I wanted to share this with people is because they argue, these doctors in USA Today, that if you succumb to the vaccination, which is something that they want to bring to the whole world. I mean, Bill Gates has said that.
Right.
And it probably won't be just one vaccination. It will probably be several. And they're holding that out as the only cure to the coronavirus issue. And if you succumb to that, you're doing your patriotic duty. In fact, you're acting like people acted during World War I and World War II, where we all did our part to beat back fascism. And of course, if you won't acquiesce to it, and I'm not really interested in acquiescing to mandatory vaccination, part of the reason is they use, as the article brings up, aborted body parts, and I'm pro-life. And part of the reason is they're marrying vaccination with microchip technology. I don't know if I want some microchip in my body that I can't get rid of. There's a lot of reasons I don't want to take this vaccine, but if you don't take it, you're already being labeled as unpatriotic. So why don't you go ahead and read, and we'll stop you at different junctures and make appropriate comments.
A coronavirus vaccine should be mandatory, and tax penalties, higher insurance premiums, and denial of many government and private services ought to be considered for those refusing the shot, 3 doctors argued in USA Today on Thursday. While the measures that will be necessary to defeat the coronavirus will seem draconian, even anti-American to some, we believe that there is no alternative. Simply put, getting vaccinated is going to be our patriotic duty, wrote Drs. Michael Lederman, Maxwell J. Melman, and Stuart Youngner. The USA Today article published August 6th is titled, "Defeat COVID-19 by Requiring Vaccination for All. It's not un-American, it's patriotic." Its original subhead read, "Make vaccines free, don't allow religious or personal objections, and punish those who won't be vaccinated, they are threatening the lives of others. It has since been changed to make vaccines free, don't allow religious or personal objections, and create disincentives for those who refuse vaccines shown to be safe and effective. When a vaccine is ready, the doctors wrote, it must be free and exemptions must only be made for people with medical contraindications to immunization. But medical conditions that prohibit all COVID-19 vaccines will be rare, they claimed. No religious or personal objections to receiving the shot or shots should be honored, they wrote, and harsh penalties should be adopted by important sectors of society to pressure the populace to comply.
Yeah, and as you're talking there, you know, we've got this screenshot, and it's all about defeat COVID-19 by requiring vaccinations for all. It's not un-American, it's patriotic. So if you don't want to comply on religious grounds, or for some of the grounds that I articulated a few moments ago, you know, you're just not cooperating with the collective whole, and you're unpatriotic. So they're automatically setting people up to take the fall for this, or to be demonized,
right,
you know, for a lack of cooperation. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No. Okay. The physicians proposed private businesses could refuse to employ or serve unvaccinated individuals. Schools could refuse to allow unimmunized children to attend classes. Public and commercial transit companies, airlines, trains, and buses could exclude refusers. Public and private auditoriums could require evidence of immunization for entry.
So you can't get in and out of key places that you need to get in and out of, whether it's business, transportation, airlines, travel. All that's eliminated if you don't show proper evidence of immunization.
Well, and isn't this interesting? They were talking about private businesses, and they list commercial transit, but they're also saying public.
Mm-hmm.
So that is bringing in the government.
Absolutely. Good point.
They then outlined how a registry of immunization will be needed with names entered after immunization is completed. People who receive the vaccine should be issued certification cards with expiration dates. The durability of protection by different vaccines may vary and may require periodic booster immunizations. The concept of immunization cards or digital vaccine records was floated shortly before the coronavirus outbreak and since the virus has spread.
So we're talking about immunization passports, certification cards, a database, because it says registry, of names entered after immunization is complete. Anyway, and sadly, the technology is there to allow them to do this. As you read the next paragraph, a December 2019 article.
Okay. Should I comment? Or
please, yeah,
okay.
Go.
You're talking about the registration, or registry, that once they get the camel nose under the tent, there's another registry that we often fear, and that's the Second Amendment. Mm. So I would think that once they can make this argument, they can make the other one.
Yeah, they can register people
who own guns.
Own guns, yeah.
Yeah.
So opening the door for one registration abuse opens the door for another.
Yeah. Okay. A December 2019 article in Scientific American described the vision of Massachusetts Institute of Technology researchers for embedding vaccine records directly into the skin of children. Along with the vaccine, a child would be injected with a bit of dye that is invisible to the naked eye but easily seen with a special cell phone filter, combined with an app that shines near-infrared light onto the skin. The dye would be expected to last up to 5 years, according to tests on pig and rat skin and human skin in a dish.
So we're talking about something that goes into the skin, in some cases on the skin. My goodness, what does that sound like to you? Certainly brings up a series of Bible verses that we're all familiar with. Revelation 13, 16 through 18. Now, we're not saying this is the mark of the beast, but the mark of the beast can't just come into existence in a vacuum. There has to be preparatory steps made. And it says he causes all, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, the free and the slave, to be given a mark, this is the Antichrist, on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. I mean, this is why this whole subject of mandatory vaccinations and how they're going to keep track of everybody is so interesting to me.
Okay. Yeah, there's something there, but I want to come to it after this next part.
Sure.
The development of this idea, which the article proudly noted, avoids using iris scans that might violate privacy, was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It came about because of a direct request from Microsoft founder and philanthropist Bill Gates himself, who has been supporting efforts to wipe out diseases such as polio and measles across the world. What I wanted to note was they think that iris scans might violate privacy, but getting your human skin and your DNA, don't we have legal decisions about a person's DNA and that privacy?
We should. I mean, I haven't researched that, but it wouldn't surprise me if we did.
I thought our Supreme Court and you know, you have to agree to these things. So they're not getting away from the fact that that is our skin is ours. I don't know how else to say that.
Yeah, last time I checked.
It's ours.
Yeah.
Okay.
And whatever happened to It's My Body? What happened to that crowd?
Yeah.
They disappeared on us, didn't they?
My body, my choice.
Keep the government off my body. Now, there, of course, they're talking about someone else's body, an unborn child, but you think people that, you know, give these slogans would be showing up and screaming and yelling, and I hear crickets. All right. Yes,
okay. So continuing, Dr. Anthony Fauci, longtime director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and one of Trump's top pandemic advisors, said in April that he thought it was possible that one day Americans may have to carry certificates showing they are immune to the coronavirus. I think it might actually have some merit under certain circumstances, he said. Also in April, Gates speculated, eventually we will have some digital certificates to show who has recovered or been tested recently, or when we have a vaccine, who has received it. Letterman, Mailman, and Youngner concluded by comparing Americans' fight against the coronavirus to World War I and World War II.
This is the part of it that really, pardon the pun, gets under my skin.
Yeah. During World War I and World War II, everyone contributed. No one was allowed to opt out merely because it conflicted with a sense of autonomy, and draft dodgers who refused to serve were subject to penalties, the doctors wrote. True, conscientious objectors could refuse to use weapons for religious reasons, but they were obligated to help out in other ways, serving in non-combatant roles. There are no such alternatives for vaccination.
See, you know, okay. Let's make a moral judgment here. Non-compliant people in the area of vaccinations are analogized to people that wouldn't help the cause to beat back fascism in the World War I and World War II eras, and they're no different than draft dodgers. So what they're doing is they're making a moral judgment, and they're setting up certain people for all kinds of ostracism, social abuse, simply because they don't want to participate with the vaccine like this. And that's why this article to me was so interesting. It's setting up a group of people for persecution.
Right.
And that would be us, wouldn't it?
And it's giving them the moral high ground and therefore the permission to take that action to persecute us. And what gets me here is it's so obvious then when they say there's no such alternatives for vaccination. That's why you don't do it. That's why it's a violation of our rights. Is because there is no alternative. You know. Okay.
But the Pope is saying elevate the collective, and the individual has to shrink, and here we're seeing the outworking of it.
Yes.
See, what I'm trying to get at is the religious arm, the economic arm, the political arm, the medical arm, they're all reading off the same script here.
Yes.
And they're altering times and laws. And now we run into Robert F. Kennedy. Folks, Robert F. Kennedy is no friend of the conservative movement. That's why I like quoting him. He's one of the strongest voices on planet Earth today against the mandatory vaccination that Bill and Melinda Gates want to do to the whole world as a consequence of COVID-19.
I know. In a recent online debate on mandatory vaccinations, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. pointed out that a significant percentage of participants in a recent trial for a leading coronavirus vaccine have been hospitalized. Kennedy, a liberal environmental attorney and member of the Kennedy political dynasty, also noted that several of the coronavirus vaccine developers, a number of which have received funding from Bill Gates, have been forced to pay billions of dollars in criminal penalties related to their medical products.
And let's skip that paragraph and pick it up in an April 9th article.
In an April 9 article, Kennedy wrote, quote, "Vaccines for Bill Gates are a strategic philanthropy that feed his many vaccine-related businesses, including Microsoft's ambition to control a global vaccination ID enterprise, and give him dictatorial control of global health policy."
Well, gee whiz, no wonder he's pushing so hard for this, Bill Gates. He's going to benefit. And go ahead and skip that paragraph and read the underlined one there.
Many immunizations are made from cell lines of aborted babies, and a number of the coronavirus vaccines being developed are also using immorally obtained fetal cell lines.
So, body parts of aborted babies, cells of aborted babies, apparently are going to be used in these vaccinations. And then the article kind of concludes with how Vladimir Putin, of all people, announced today that his country has approved the world's first coronavirus vaccine. And all of that to say that we're living in this time period where your opportunity to opt out of this kind of thing has shrunk.
Right.
And if you desire to opt out and you're vocal about it, you're the bad guy. Because you're the draft dodger.
Yes.
So
evil me.
It's amazing how fast things are accelerating. Now, we have this article also from kansascity.com. The title of it is "Employees Need Masks." Now catch this. Even for at-home Zoom calls. Wisconsin agency says, "Here's Why" by T.J. Macias, August 10th, 2020. What's that all about there?
Okay. In an email to employees sent out on July 31, the head of Wisconsin's Department of Natural Resources not only reminded employees of Governor Tony Evers' mask order going into effect on August 1, he also said that every DNR employee must wear a mask, quote, even while on a teleconference. Also wear your mask even...
And this is a quote from his email.
Yes, sir. Also wear your mask even if you are home to participate in a virtual meeting that involves being seen, such as on Zoom or another video conferencing platform, by non-DNR staff, Preston Cole said, according to the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Continuing his quote, "Set the safety example which shows you, as a DNR public service employee, care about the safety and health of others."
So here are the authorities in Wisconsin saying even if you're on a Zoom call, you need to have your mask on. In fact, here's a picture of the fellow with his mask on there, getting ready, I guess, for his Zoom call. I didn't know the virus was so good, Tom Aaliyah, that it could travel through the computer. Did you know it was that smart?
That's pretty...
And you're supposed to wear this mask, as they're arguing in this email, because it's setting a good example. And we don't want people to think that this is some kind of outside activity. We don't want them to make that mistake. So let's have them wear the mask during the Zoom call. This reminds me very much of Broward County. Broward County, we covered it a few weeks ago in Florida, is basically making mask wearing something that people have to do inside their houses. Now, if you have to do it inside your house, how do they monitor that other than to set up a camera inside the house?
Yeah.
So are we ready for that, Mr. and Mrs. America? Are you ready for the government to sit and surveil you while you're inside what the legal system used to refer to as your own castle? You know, your house is your castle. Well, here comes government into the house to monitor that you've got your mask on.
And you were talking a moment ago about, my body, my choice. See, that was another argument we always used to hear about was, I don't want the government in my bedroom.
There you go.
And
keep the government out of my bedroom. What I do in my bedroom is my own business. Now, if it happens to be policing you to make sure your mask is on, we can put the camera right in your bedroom, couldn't we?
Well, yeah.
Can you see any logical stopping point to this? And my point is the insanity of this. I mean, this guy wearing his mask is not doing anything to stop COVID-19 because he's on a Zoom call. And even if he was wearing this mask in public, I would argue it's not doing anything to stop it either, because the virus is so small, it's like trying to stop a mosquito with a chain link fence. But now they're arguing that just to be a good example, you better, and if you want to work for the government in Wisconsin, this particular bureaucracy, then you better have that mask on during Zoom calls. This is how privacy and individual liberty is being demolished as a consequence of COVID-19.
Well, so there's the reason they give, and then there's the real reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
what's the real reason?
Evers' executive orders said that the face coverings are required to be worn whenever a person is in an enclosed space other than a private residence. But DNR spokeswoman Megan Sheridan spoke with McClatchy News and said that employees wearing masks while video conferencing with external partners sets a good example during the pandemic. Quote, by wearing a mask while video conferencing with the general public, we visually remind folks that masking is an important part of navigating the business of natural resources during this tumultuous time, Sheridan said. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention does not advise wearing a face mask while social distancing in your home, except under certain conditions. Sheridan also said there was another reason employees were asked to don masks while on remote video conferences.
So what's the real reason, according to your view?
Quote, we ask staff to wear masks when on externally facing calls is that, taken out of context, a screenshot of a staff person or high-ranking department official, if not properly attributed, could be misinterpreted to suggest that state employees are not properly following the governor's directive, she said to McClatchy.
Yeah. So this is the type of insanity that we're into now. Now, I found this particular article on the Facebook post of my professor, Dr. Charlie Dyer of Dallas Seminary, and I like what he said in his private post as he posted this article. What does Dr. Dyer say there?
When I first saw this post, I thought it had to be fake, but sadly it appears to be all too real. I wear a mask when I go out because I'm asked to, because it makes some others feel safer, and because it might help keep the virus from spreading. But to require an employee to wear a mask on a Zoom call from home for appearance sake is the height of idiocy that will actually make people not want to wear a mask. Why didn't someone tell whoever made the rule that this runs contrary to common sense? It sounds like a decision made by a leader more concerned about appearance than making decisions based on what is medically necessary. If I lived in Wisconsin, I would be writing to the governor.
Now, the only part of this I disagree with is he thinks he's got to live in Wisconsin to write to the governor. I mean, do you think it's okay that we in Texas write to the governor? Do you think they listen to us? I have a tendency to think they would, because I think they assume that if one person from Texas is irate enough about it, then there must be a ton of people in his own state that are irate about it. But I very much like what he says here, that it's the height of idiocy. You know, I look at this guy's picture. This is idiocy.
Yeah.
This is insanity. I mean, George Soros must be just laughing his head off looking at things like this. Here's the guy on a Zoom call with his ridiculous mask on because he wants to be a good example. And Dr. Charles Dyer is exactly right. You've got a leader here that's more interested in making decisions based on appearance than on medical facts, because there is no factual basis whatsoever for putting on a mask during a Zoom call. That's going to do absolutely nothing.
Right.
I guess you could make the argument that masks work in public, but how do you make that argument when he's on a Zoom call in private? But this is what is being accepted. This is what is being tolerated.
Yes.
In the area of the death of individual liberty. I contributed something to David Fiorazzo's podcast, Stand Up for the Truth, on this. He quoted me, and I say, "This is something that we have sensed all along, that this has nothing to do with containing the virus, but everything to do with government control over every area of our life." I mean, we're watching the First Amendment and the other amendments crash and burn. In fact, this just came in. Todd Starnes, formerly of Fox News. I don't think he's on Fox News anymore, is he, to your knowledge?
I don't know.
He's doing some kind of podcast, but he writes this just in, and he mentions an attorney. Now, this particular attorney is representing John MacArthur. John MacArthur out in Southern California is starting to say no, to these government authorities that are saying his church can't meet. And so this attorney said to Todd Starnes, this particular attorney just announced on the Todd Starnes show that and I want you to visualize or conceptualize these words. These words mean something very significant. This just in, Los Angeles County is asking a judge for a restraining order to stop John MacArthur from preaching inside Grace Community Church. So, Los Angeles County is trying to stop John MacArthur from preaching under the pretext of public safety, COVID-19, social distancing, etc. Anybody that knows me knows I'm not exactly a charter member of John MacArthur's fan club theologically, but for crying out loud, this is not China, this is not Russia, this is the United States of America. The man has constitutional rights. I mean, have you ever seen anything like this in your lifetime, where a county is seeking a restraining order to stop a preacher from preaching, not on the public sidewalk somewhere, but inside their own church?
No.
I mean,
I haven't.
Is this the new normal? And it's not just John MacArthur, there's several others. There's a guy named Rob McCoy, Ventura County, facing the same issue. Jack Hibbs, Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, which I think is in either Orange County or Riverside County, Southern California, facing the same issue. And so for the first time in my lifetime, Christians in the United States are having to face the prospect of fines, misdemeanors, jail time, or going to church. And preachers are having to make the decision, am I going to preach to my flock on Sunday morning, or am I going to suffer criminal penalties? And this is all being done under the rubric of social distancing, COVID-19, public health, etc. By the way, next week, my family and myself are actually going to be at one of these churches participating in a conference. And so you may have to come visit me in the Gray Bar Inn.
The Gray Bar. Well, I was just going to tell you, I think Paul did some of his best work from behind bars.
No, someone just needs to bring my toothbrush. And I have minty dental floss that I like to use also.
Well, and you were saying this just in. The timestamp on this is 26 hours ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is
August 13th.
This is happening in real time. So that all falls under the category of loss of individual liberties. People are being stigmatized as unpatriotic if they won't comply by doctors in USA Today. People on Zoom conferences are being forced to wear masks, and preachers are being taken out of their pulpits. Welcome to the new normal. Now, cheer up, folks, it gets worse, because what enters the picture is Kamala Harris, and I put here President Kamala Harris because we all know of Biden's declining mental acuity.
Right.
So should that ticket, Biden and Harris, win, she, in a nanosecond, could become the leader of the free world, even though she placed 16th in the Democratic primary. she could very easily become president of the United States. So we need to examine, everything we need to know about Kamala Harris. And all the research I've done on her, indicates that she's anti everything that you and I believe in as Christians and constitutionalists and conservatives. And it's not a matter of her gender, and it's not a matter of her race. It's all about her worldview.
Right.
So, for example, I have this article here from ChristianHeadlines.com, Michael Faust, 4 reasons Kamala Harris selection for VP concerns Christian leaders. Here are 4 reasons that the selection of Harris by Biden troubles Christians and social conservative leaders. Number 1, her position on abortion. Harris has a 0% pro-life voting record. Now, that would take some work to accumulate a record of 0%. Number 2, she criticizes a Catholic group. You want to pick it up there?
By reading about it?
Yeah.
In 2018, Harris asked federal judge nominee Brian Buescher a series of written questions about his involvement in the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic fraternal organization. The questions implied that his membership disqualified him from a seat on the court.
So a judge comes up for nomination, and this guy's involved with the Catholic group, and she questions him about that and implies he's disqualified because of his strong Catholic beliefs. By the way, this is exactly what Bernie Sanders did to one of the Trump picks related to, I guess it was accounting or something like that. And you'll also remember that Dianne Feinstein did this to one of the Trump judicial picks. You're Catholic, the dogma's too loud in you. Is that not a violation of Article 6, Paragraph 3 of the Constitution, which specifically says no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office holder or public trust under the United States? So what Harris and Feinstein and Sanders are doing is they're barring Christians from participating in government by making their religion some kind of issue to disqualify them. That's Kamala Harris. Number 3, she refused as Attorney General of California to defend Proposition 8. Proposition 8 was passed by the people of California in 2008 by a margin of 52 to 48%, and it's a proposition that calls for one man and one woman as a marital standard, and she just refused to enforce the law, even though it had been duly passed by the people of California. And then number 4, Harris is a big supporter of the Equality Act. And tell us about that.
Harris is co-sponsor of the Equality Act, an LGBT-focused bill that opponents and even some bill supporters say would force public schools to allow transgender athletes to compete in the sport of their preferred gender. That means biological boys who identify as girls would be allowed to play on girls' teams. In Connecticut, 2 biological boys won 15 track state titles.
So just those 4 issues alone, I mean, her values are not my values. They're not your values. And in fact, if the 2 of them win, I would say this will be the most radical left-wing ticket we've ever had in American history. And that's what we're facing in this next election cycle. Not only that, but cheer up, folks, it gets worse. According to lifenews.com, Kamala Harris raided David Daleidon's home for exposing Planned Parenthood selling aborted baby parts in an August 12th, 2020 article. Remember, he came out and exposed how they were trafficking, commercializing baby parts. Well, what does Harris do? She doesn't go after, as the Attorney General of California, Planned Parenthood. She goes after the guy who exposed Planned Parenthood. And in fact, here's a picture, a screenshot from his Twitter feed. And what did he say on this particular Twitter feed the moment Harris was selected as Biden's VP?
Lots of people are asking me what I think of the news tonight. At Kamala Harris is the greatest threat to First Amendment civil rights our country has ever seen. I know because she had my home raided for speaking the truth about her political patrons at Planned Parenthood.
So he says she's the greatest threat to the First Amendment and civil rights our country has ever seen. I mean, is this the person we really want in power as the First Amendment hangs in the balance? Another screenshot of someone's Twitter feed. It says, will any journalist do a story of how Kamala Harris, Attorney General of California, raided the home of David Daleiden and seized his hard drives because he instigated, or rather investigated, Planned Parenthood? Here's yet another Twitter feed from Lila Rose. Breaking: Biden has picked Kamala Harris to run as his vice president. Harris abused her power as California Attorney General to raid the home of David Daleiden. She prosecuted pro-life journalists when they dared investigate Planned Parenthood selling of baby parts. She supports killing of babies up until birth. This is who we're going to receive into power should she win. Someone with this background. And by the way, how did she get into power in the first place? Here is an article from the American Thinker by Monica Showalter, August 12th, 2020, and the title of it is Willie Brown Admits It, Kamala Harris Slept Her Way to the Top. Now, Willie Brown is a name that I know because I grew up in California. He was a very powerful leader in the assembly. I think he was what they would call the Speaker of the House back in that time period, the 1980s. And what we learn here is Willie Brown tweets out, and we have a picture of the two of them, by the way, back in 1994. Willie Brown essentially admits that she was his mistress for years and years and years. And looking at this article towards the bottom, it says Willie Brown, quote, I've been peppered with calls from the national news media about my relationship with Kamala Harris, particularly since it became obvious that she was going to run for president. Yes, we dated, is what he says. And let's see, he does say something else here. Yes, we dated. He said this in a San Francisco Chronicle column. I think Willie Brown was also the mayor of San Francisco for a long time, if memory serves. Yes, we dated. It was more than 20 years ago. Yes, I may have influenced her career by appointing her to 2 state commissions when I was the Assembly Speaker, and I certainly helped with her first race for District Attorney in San Francisco. I have also helped the careers of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Governor Gavin Newsom, and Senator Dianne Feinstein, and a host of other politicians. So Willie Brown is kind of the guy that puts people in power. So why wouldn't he put in power his mistress?
Yeah, okay.
Or his paramour?
Well, I was going to say, because he was married. He's saying dated, and he was married at the time.
Yeah, this was not just a date. She was his mistress. This is an adulterous affair. And, you know, feminists, aren't they all about rising to the top as a woman through your own abilities and grit? I don't think they're in favor of putting people into positions of influence because they slept their way to the top. And that's how she made her way onto the political scene. This is Kamala Harris. Well, gee, Andy, that's terrible to bring up something like that about somebody. Well, here's the deal. Don't we know every bad thing there is to know about Donald Trump? I mean, every indiscretion, every infidelity, every divorce, every remarriage, we know all about it. So why can't we know about Kamala Harris, who may become our president, even though she placed 16th in the Democratic primary? Just because she's now picked and Biden, his mental acuity is disintegrating. Where am I going wrong?
No, well, and what I want to say is that we believe in forgiveness, and so, you know, is there any admission that this was wrong and a change of heart?
Sure. And, it's what I'm trying to say about Kamala Harris, in addition to her worldview, in addition to the fact that she's wrong on key cultural issues, in addition to the fact that she put the man who exposed Planned Parenthood through the ringer and abused her power as the Attorney General of the state of California, she comes from this completely and totally corrupted background and wouldn't even be in the position that she's in today had it not been for the fact that she was Willie Brown's mistress.
Right.
I don't think they're going to talk about this on CNN News, do you? Not only that, folks, it gets worse. She may not even be constitutionally qualified to be the President of the United States, because we have in our Constitution Article 2, Section 1, Paragraph 5, which says no person except a natural-born citizen shall be eligible to the office of the presidency. Now, this was an issue that was really big in the Obama years.
Right.
And what does Yogi Berra say? It's deja vu all over again. So what does that article say? This is from the New American, and this was written by a lawyer from Judicial Watch, I believe, whose name is, I want to say his first name is Larry Klayman, if I've got that right.
Okay. Senator Kamala Devi Harris, Democrat of California, cannot become president unless she is a natural-born citizen. The U.S. Constitution contains few eligibility criteria for our nation's highest post, but being born to the country is one of them. Since the vice president must be able to succeed to the presidency, Harris could not run as vice president either.
Okay, let's stop right there and let's just get right down to it. Let's go to the top of page 13 and let's see what the issue is with Kamala Harris and why she runs afoul of Article 2, Section 1, Paragraph 5, indicating that the president must be a natural-born citizen of the United States of America. What does it say there at the top?
Both of Harris' parents were present in the United States under student visas when Harris was born in Oakland, California. They were not U.S. citizens at that time. A student visa requires a non-immigrant intent. That is, one must swear that they have no intent to stay. Harris' parents appear to have lied.
And grab that next paragraph.
Her father is described as an African-American from Jamaica. Her mother, Shyamala Gopalan, was from India and graduated from the University of Delhi at 19. Her parents separated a few years after Harris was born and divorced when Harris was 7. Her mother entered the country only 4 years before Harris was born, and her father only 3 years before.
So, how can she be a natural-born citizen when she was indeed born in the United States? I mean, that's not an issue. But both of her parents at the time of her birth are here on student visas, and a student visa requires a non-immigrant intent. And is that actually the meaning of the Constitution? Larry Klayman in this article goes on and quotes a lot of sources indicating that that, in fact, is the intent of the United States Constitution. It's too much for us to read. But, of course, like many people, he leaves out the most important thing, and that's the fact that the United States Constitution was influenced by the Bible. And, of course, it was influenced by other things as well, but here's a citation from Donald Lute's book, The Origins of American Constitutionalism, trying to figure out what the Founding Fathers were quoting the most from. And according to this study, 34% of the Founding Fathers' quotations come from the Bible. And then a quarter as many of citations come from Montesquieu, another quarter as much from Blackstone, and only 3% come from Locke. And if we had time to go into it, I could show you that Montesquieu, Blackstone, and Locke were heavily influenced by the Bible. So when our Founding Fathers were not quoting the Bible, they were quoting men influenced by the Bible. And Tamalia, guess what the Founding Fathers' favorite biblical book was? Was it the book of Revelation? Was it the book of John, a Gospel of John? Was it Romans? No, here is a quote from this book here, Donald Lutz, The Relative Influence of European Writers on 18th Century American Political Thought, page 192, also picked up by John Eidsmoe in his excellent book, Christianity and the Constitution, The Faith of Our Founding Fathers. You mind reading that little quote to us there?
The fifth book of the Bible, Deuteronomy, because of its heavy emphasis on biblical law, was referred to frequently.
So here's what our founding fathers did when they made up our Constitution. They're quoting the Bible, or they're quoting men influenced by the Bible. And by the way, our favorite book of the Bible is the book of Deuteronomy. And my goodness, what do we find in the book of Deuteronomy? We have this clause here concerning kings. And what does it say there in Deuteronomy 17, verse 15?
You shall surely set a king over you, whom the Lord your God chooses. One from among your brethren you shall set as king over you. You may not set a foreigner over you, who is not your brother.
So when you get about the business, Israel, of picking a king, make sure he is an Israelite, not a foreigner. And that, folks, is the origin, and I would encourage you to read the Clayman article too, because he gives some other sources. But that is the origin of Article 2, Section 1, Paragraph 5, which says, no person except a natural-born citizen shall be eligible to the office of the presidency. That's Deuteronomy 17, verse 15, which our founding fathers, there's no doubt in my mind, that's what they were looking at.
Right.
And so when Kamala Harris has two parents that are here on student visas, non-immigrant, intent, she can't be Biden's VP because she's next in line for the presidency, and she's running afoul of, what was it, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5, which has its origins in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 15. So, in essence, what's going on? We've got the same issue that happened in the Obama years now resurfacing via Kamala Harris. Where am I going wrong?
You're not. It's this lawlessness. And I just think it's very interesting that this is pointing out, for those who keep track of these arguments about visa and immigration to the United States, here's someone else who has blatantly violated, the terms of coming here on a student visa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There we go. So the Kamala Harris pick to me is earth-shaking because given Biden's declining mental acuity, she could become the leader of the free world. She's obviously very liberal on 4 issues. She's obviously abused her office as Attorney General to prosecute people who aren't breaking the law, like Planned Parenthood, but exposing it. She wouldn't be in the position that she's in had she not been Willie Brown's mistress. And she's not a natural-born citizen. I mean, the whole Kamala Harris pick is a disaster from top to bottom. And, it's like Hillary Clinton. I can't really find anything on her resume indicating that she's a successful, independent woman either. I mean, she's in the position that she's in because she married a successful man, and yet she's the voice of feminism. I thought that's what feminists were against.
Right.
And had, Kamala Harris not had this relationship as the mistress to Willie Brown, we would have never heard the name Kamala Harris. I better keep moving here. Feel free to add something.
I think the thing about her is that she is going to be someone who does exactly what the global elites want, mm-hmm. and that she will stay on message. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that I've noticed about her is mm-hmm. that she stays focused on the task, mm-hmm. and that's scary.
And if you bring up anything like this publicly, you hate women, you're a misogynist, and you're a racist. And yet everything we presented here is factual. It's got nothing to do with the fact that she's a woman, or it has nothing to do with her race. It has everything to do with these other issues.
Well, I think someone who wants to allow males to cheat and deprive females of scholarships.
You're talking about the Equality Act?
I think that's someone who hates women.
Yeah.
And because that one was going to get me wound up,
Yeah.
is, these boys cheating. Because you know that after they get their Olympic medal, 5 years down the road, they're an advertising spokesman for like razors, how to get a smooth shave.
Mm-hmm.
And they will have discontinued all the suppression of the hormones.
Mm-hmm.
So I get kind of cranky about that whole topic, and there she is filing the bill.
And not only that, but can't a man who transitions as a woman and participates in women's sports, since men are physically stronger, all things considered, than women, can't his participation, particularly in a contact sport like soccer, basketball, hockey, whatever, can't that hurt a woman physically? I mean, can't she be physically hurt competing under those circumstances? And how is that pro-woman?
Yeah, mixed martial arts.
Yeah.
I don't keep track of them very close, but read the headline. The guy knocked the daylights out of the other woman, and she was the top woman.
Yeah.
And he knocked the daylights out of her.
Yeah. So Kamala Harris, I think, will contribute to the decline of the United States of America, which will fit very nicely into the global reset.
Yes.
Let's wrap up here with our last item, and we want to get to this because a lot of folks have been asking about this, is Israel's third peace treaty. I think the subjugation of Israel is part of this great global reset. Israel has to exist, but she has to be kind of put in her place through a myriad of treaties. And we have this article from yahoo.com. The title of it is Israel United Emirates Agree to Full Normalization of Relations, and Sephora Smith et al. Is the author of this particular article, August 13th, 2020, yahoo.com. 2 short paragraphs. You mind reading those to us just so we can get familiar with what just happened yesterday?
Israel and the United Arab Emirates on Thursday agreed to normalize ties in a major diplomatic breakthrough brokered by President Donald Trump. As part of the agreement, Israel will suspend declaring sovereignty over areas outlined in the Trump administration's Mideast peace plan, the statement said. Adding the country would focus on expanding ties with other countries in the Arab and Muslim world.
So it's this historic, I should say, peace deal.
Mm-hmm.
Now this would be Israel's third peace deal. She already has one with Jordan. She has one with Egypt. This is her first one from one of the Gulf states, the United Arab Emirates, and it's basically normalizing diplomatic ties. Each can have embassies in each other's country, normalizing economics. The United Arab Emirates, of course, has to recognize the existence of the State of Israel. And that all sounds well and good on the surface, but what I'm always wondering is, what does Israel have to give up to receive this new status? And this article says, as part of the agreement, Israel will suspend declaring sovereignty, that's authority, over areas outlined in the Trump administration's Middle East peace plan, the statement said, adding the country would focus on expanding ties with other countries in the Arab and Muslim world. So Israel is now not given sovereignty to make decisions over Judea and Samaria, which are within the borders of Israel, the Jordan Valley, which is within the borders of Israel. I know you read Carolyn Glick. I think Carolyn Glick was upset about this. So this is just one of these deals that the state of Israel is given less and less control, less and less autonomy to do what she wants within her own borders,
Right.
is how I would read this. And we have an article here from the Jerusalem Post. The title of it is Israel United Arab Emirates Reach Historic Peace Deal. We can make a wonderful future, and it's got several authors to it. And what does that article say?
Third ever peace treaty between Israel and an Arab state includes embassies, direct flights. Agreement suspends annexation, but Netanyahu says, quote, I will never give up on our right to our land, end quote. Israel agreed to suspend its planned extension of sovereignty over parts of Judea and Samaria to facilitate relations with the UAE and potentially other Arab and Muslim countries.
Yeah, let me stop you there. Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, is very involved here. It quotes Crown Prince Zayed. However, Ben Zayed presented the matter as though he had exacted concessions from Israel, emphasizing the suspension of sovereignty plans over normalization. He tweeted, why don't you pick it up there?
That an agreement was reached to stop further Israeli annexation of Palestinian territories.
So it's like Israel is not giving up territory here, but her autonomy over those territories is now put in handcuffs. Is that your reading of this?
Yes, and you know, he's putting a spin on it, but you know, yeah, they're agreeing to stop.
And continue on there with Egyptian President, if you can pronounce that, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi.
I think so, al-Sisi. Similarly called it, quote, the agreement to stop Israel's annexation of the Palestinian territories and taking steps to bring peace to the Middle East, end quote. The Trump administration's vision for peace would allow Israel to apply its law to 30% of Judea and Samaria, including all settlements in the Jordan Valley.
So you can only control 30% of Judea and Samaria, which they call the West Bank, which is a big chunk of real estate. And you can't do settlements in the Jordan Valley. That's what Israel is conceding to by getting normalization from the United Arab Emirates. The article goes on in the Jerusalem Post, and it says the rest of the West Bank would be designated for an eventual Palestinian state. Am I reading that right? Don't they already have a Palestinian state called Gaza? Didn't they already try this?
They have one called Jordan.
Jordan?
but I'm going way back to Balfour.
Yeah, but I'm thinking of Gaza. That's in the, what would that be? The, let's see, southwest part of the, if you can think of a map of Israel, the southwest part of it.
Yeah.
And they gave that to the Palestinians, didn't they, in 2005? They had one and only one election there. They voted in Hamas, and they've used that little strip to launch missile attack after missile attack after missile attack into the land of Israel, building tunnels of terror into the land of Israel to execute kidnappings, grabbing kids as they're walking home from school. I mean, that's how well this Palestinian state mindset works. And apparently this is what this new peace deal is all about. It's what the Trump deal of the century is all about, this two-state solution. It goes on and it says diplomatic sources in Jerusalem and Washington pointed to the use of the word suspend, which implies that the pause is only temporary. So they're trying to get around it by saying, oh, don't worry, we're not telling Israel to give up anything, just to suspend activity in those territories. Here it talks about a leader who slammed Netanyahu for suspending sovereignty plans. It's unfortunate that Netanyahu gave up a once-in-a-century chance to supply sovereignty to the Jordan Valley. It's tragic that Netanyahu did not seize the moment and didn't have the courage to apply sovereignty to a centimeter of the land of Israel. Now, what does all of this mean, this peace treaty? Well, we can analyze it prophetically. We have Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, which indicates that the prophetic event, which will start the 7-year tribulation period, will be a peace treaty between the Antichrist and unbelieving Israel. And notice what Daniel 9 verse 27 says. Then he, that's the Antichrist, shall confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week. You can't confirm a covenant unless a covenant exists.
Okay.
So it's like he's coming alongside a covenant that already exists. I think the Hebrew word is gabor, where he's strengthening it.
Mm.
So I would say that this treaty, along with the one with Egypt and along with the one with Jordan, are the treaties he's going to come along and further strengthen. I mean, you can't strengthen a treaty that doesn't exist.
Right.
And so therefore this new treaty, I think, is another piece of the jigsaw puzzle, setting the stage for Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. We have our tribulation chart there, which indicates that the covenant between the Antichrist and unbelieving Israel is what starts the 7-year tribulation period following the rapture of the church. And it's a time period, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3, where people are saying peace and safety. Why are they saying peace and safety? Because the Antichrist has come on the scene and he's intensified the covenants that already exist. And what we're told in the book of Isaiah, chapter 28, verse 15, is that when Israel does that, she will have made a covenant with death and with Sheol. Isaiah 28:18 says, your covenant with death will be annulled. So apparently God is not in favor of this particular covenant because they're reaching out to the Antichrist as their Savior, not understanding that their Savior came 2,000 years ago in the person of Jesus Christ. Now, all of this is so interesting to me because 100 years ago, a prophecy like Daniel 9:27 wouldn't make any sense. A, you don't have an Israel in existence. And even if you had an Israel in existence, she's not in a mindset where she's entering into deals to guarantee her survival for the Antichrist to come along and strengthen. And now we have all of that happening in our own lifetime. So God, I think, is setting the stage politically. And as Israel keeps acquiescing territory in exchange for peace, or in this case in the deal with the United Arab Emirates, she's basically saying we're not going to exercise sovereignty over our own territory. She's putting herself in a position where she has to depend upon somebody else for help. And that puts the right psychology in place, for this coming deal, with the Antichrist. And so that's how I think all of this fits into the prophetic scheme. What do you see?
I don't think I have anything I could add to any of that.
And what a lot of people are asking is this a good deal? I mean, that's what it means prophetically, but is it a good deal? I don't think it's a good deal at all. One of the problems we're facing in evangelical Christianity is a lot of prophecy ministries are so pro-Trump that they're no longer analyzing these things biblically. And they're sort of putting a spin on it because we're in an election year. And for whatever reason, being in an election year colors everybody's objectivity. And so no one wants to make the Trump administration look bad because we certainly don't want Biden and Harris. But, we're obligated to talk about the Bible and to tell the truth. And I don't think this is a good deal for the simple reason that both parties are not acting in good faith. You're dealing with Muslims in these deals, and Muslims can lie to advance their cause. They have something called taqiyya. A Jew is not allowed to do that because one of the 10 Commandments in the Decalogue is don't bear false witness. And so they can say we're going to agree to normalizing relations with Israel all they want, but they have no intention, of keeping their word. And we know from Ezekiel 38 and 39 that they're the ones that are actually going to invade Israel in the last days, including Egypt, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates, and violate their word. And beyond that, I hope people, if they ever do some reading on this, will get the book by Joan Peters called From Time Immemorial. And she went over some years ago to that part of the world, taking the side of the Palestinians as a liberal, thinking that Israel had stolen Palestinian land. And she actually did an expose of the evidence and the records, and she ended up becoming very pro-Israel on the grounds that Israel, in her existence, is not doing anything illegal. And in fact, if you go back to what is called the San Remo Accords, have you heard of that? That's the Allies following World War I in San Remo, Italy, deciding what to do about the modern state of Israel, what would become the modern state of Israel, gave the nation of Israel all of the land that she's in now. And there's actually a Canadian lawyer named Jacques, I think his middle name is Paul, Jacques Paul Gauthier, who completed a massive dissertation at the University of Geneva. He is a Canadian lawyer. He had hostile readers in his dissertation. So he had to, as we say, dot every I and cross every T. And he has produced a work of scholarship as a result of that 20-year process that's irrefutable. And his conclusion is, you can say whatever you want about the nation of Israel, but the nation of Israel in her current existence, even with her post-1967 borders, is not doing anything illegal. And so I don't like it when the world powers bully Israel into not building settlements on her own land, giving up the Jordan Valley, all of these things that the Trump administration has tried to do through the so-called deal of the century. Everything that's happening with this deal with the United Arab Emirates, telling Israel you can't exercise annexation or sovereignty on your own territory, because it's all premised on the fact that Israel is doing something illegal when she's not. Everything she's done is legal. It's according to San Remo. It's by the book. And so, here's a picture of Pompeo, I think with the leader there of the United Emirates as they're brokering this deal. But, I personally don't think the thing is good at all. I know that puts me on the outs with certain groups that are trying to promote the Trump administration at all costs in an election year. I don't like this vision for peace that the Trump administration has put on their website. And I don't think this bodes well for the Trump administration, because Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, God is very clear that the one who curses you, I will curse. And so if the Trump administration is somehow pressuring Israel to not do certain things on her own territory, I think that puts the United States on the wrong side of that blessings and curses mandate as given by God himself. I'm very mindful of Joel chapter 3, verse 2, which explains the reason why the wrath of God is going to hit planet Earth in the tribulation period. What does Joel chapter 3, verse 2 say?
I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Then I will enter into judgment with them there on behalf of my people and my inheritance Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and they have divided up my land.
So why is God going to judge all of the nations in the tribulation period? It's very clear here. They've divided my land. That's God's land.
Right.
And nations that get involved in pressuring Israel to give up land, or in this case, suspend activity on their own land. Now, maybe that's not a division of the land, but it's a step in that direction. Put themselves on the wrong side of the blessings and curses. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And so I'm sort of disturbed by it. If folks really want to know what we think about the Trump Middle East peace plan, please go back and review Pastor's Point of View number 109. We dealt with that in depth. And could this hurt Trump's re-election chances? I would just say this. Do you remember George Herbert Walker Bush after the Persian Gulf War with 90% approval rating?
Yeah.
He started to do this kind of thing to the nation of Israel, started to pressure them to give up land in exchange for loan guarantees. In fact, at the time, his Secretary of State, James Baker, as recorded in the Jewish press, entitled George Bush, James Baker, and the Jews by Saul Singer, infamously quipped, expletive, we'll let people fill in the blank themselves, expletive, the Jews, they don't vote for us anyway. And wasn't it interesting how that Republican ticket went from a 90% approval rating following the Persian Gulf War to into the basement where they lost to an unknown governor from a very small state.
And do you know
whose
how
name happened to be Bill Clinton?
Well, and the way it did was it divided his base. It divided the Republican Party by having this third-party candidate come in.
That was Ross Perot.
And so it wasn't even just that the other party, the Democrat Party, was more enthusiastic and more of them showed up to vote. It's that Bush's support was divided just as he was. I mean, that's...
I've never thought of it that way.
That's the way I perceive it.
Well, doesn't God say, the one who curses you, I will curse?
Yeah.
I mean, that's very literal historically. You remember the Egyptians were drowning the Hebrew babies in the Nile. What did God do to the Egyptians? He drowned them, I should say, in the Red Sea. And you remember what Egypt was doing to God's firstborn. God calls the nation of Israel his firstborn.
Right.
Exodus 4, verse 22. And isn't it interesting that in Plague 10, God killed all the firstborn within Egypt? I mean, I will curse those who curse you is very literal.
Yes.
And George H.W. Bush was seeking to divide the land of Israel. And as you point out, God divided the political base of G.H.W. Bush. I remember that because everybody said, well, Bill Clinton only got 43% of the vote when he won.
Yeah.
That's because the base was divided. Yeah. And look at the United States right now. The division between red state and blue state, we haven't been more divided as a country probably since the Civil War. And that's because we've had several administrations, Republican and Democrat, that have sought to divide the land of Israel. But the land of Israel has a place to play in this global reset. She exists, but at the same time, she's in a place of subjugation. And so I would say this deal with the United Arab Emirates is setting the stage for that. And I don't think, personally, it bodes well for the Trump administration, even though I certainly don't want Harris and Biden to ascend to the presidency.
Well, we're caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
I guess I may need this.
So, gosh, that is all we have for today. Just by way of review, I'm trying to find my outline slide. We've talked about what the global elites are saying related to COVID-19 via Soros and the Pope. We've talked about the collapse of liberty that's happening as a result of this. We've talked about the prophetic and political implications of a potential President Kamala Harris. And we've tried to explain the best we can how Israel's third peace treaty, this one with the United Arab Emirates, plays into the whole thing. So do we leave people with all the bad news, or do we end with a note of hope? Well, we like to end with Daniel 2, verses 44 and 45 as we put up our final slide. Do you mind reading that to us?
I have to find it.
You can read it off mine.
Oh, sorry about that, folks. You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay, and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy.
So the bottom line is, yeah, Satan's getting his global reset right now, but God's going to get his global reset. Right?
Yes.
Because Satan's, he gets his kingdom, but it only lasts, 3.5 years? It'll be crushed. It says crushed here, doesn't it?
Yes.
By God's kingdom, and the stone will grow and grow and grow till it fills the whole earth. A few comments and questions came in. I have half a mind to just cut it off here, but this is part of it, and so I've already blown the clock sky high, so I might as well just add another 5 minutes or so. But this person writes in and says, William Rawle, formerly the U.S. Attorney for Pennsylvania, 1791 to 1799, defined the natural-born citizen as every person born within the United States, regardless of the citizenship of their parents. He who was subsequently born the citizen of a state became the moment of his birth a United States citizen. I would say to take a look at that Larry Klayman article that we quoted from the American Thinker, because he gives a pretty good historical analysis that to be a natural-born citizen is more than just birth in the United States. I mean, your parents have to be citizens of here as well. Another person writes in and says, now that's an anchor baby. And it's the issue with many people who come to the USA late in pregnancy to have babies. So we call that phenomenon anchor babies.
Yeah. And
they're trying to argue they can't be deported. Another person writes in, and this is a compliment for you. As much as I like Jim McGowan, Tamalia is an excellent compliment to Andy's pastor's point of view, and that's why we have her on. It's not charity. It's expertise and competence. Another person writes in, and I don't like when people do this because they mention a particular minister and they want me to critique that minister, so I'm going to leave the name out of it. But they say, why is so-and-so, who I guess has a prophecy update kind of ministry, excited about this peace deal? Why is he thrilled it was signed? And I would say this, that a lot of so-called prophecy ministries have become more pro-Trump than they are pro-Bible. And they have a tendency to spin things to support their candidate because to them the alternative of a Biden-Harris presidency would be unthinkable. I think it's unthinkable as well. But I don't want to let my personal political point of view get in the way of what God's Word says. So this is pastor's point of view. We start with the Bible.
Yes.
Our order of loyalty is to God first and His Word, then the United States Constitution, and then last on the list would be the Republican Party. If the Republican Party strays from the Bible or the Constitution, and then the Bible, then that's where we stray from the Republican Party. What did Reagan say?
He said the same thing about Gaza.
Yeah. What did Reagan say? He said, the party didn't leave me, or I didn't leave the party left me.
Yeah, he was talking about the Democrats.
Democrats, and that's how we feel sometimes about the Republican Party. So that's why we're different than a lot of other prophecy update ministries. A lot of other prophecy update ministries are trying to amp you up for the next election. We want you to vote as well, but we want to not let that agenda eclipse what God's Word says. God says, don't divide my land. And it's not good for any party, Republican or Democrat, that does that. What how would you add to that? I know you have some, we've talked about this, I know you've got some strong thoughts on it.
Yes.
And you've actually, I don't know if I should even say this, but in some of your activities, you found yourself on the outer edges of groups because you won't toe the party line because you're more interested in what God says than what the party line says.
Yes. And
so she's actually walked the walk.
Yeah.
Did I say too much there?
No, you didn't say too much. It's more the pressure of being able to say something politely. But I just say that there are many times that I see abuses coming down from Republican governors, just like I see them coming down from elected Democrats. So they're bipartisan in their tyranny.
Mm-hmm. And so contact tracing, which we didn't talk about today, is coming to the state of Texas through a Republican governor at the present time.
Yes.
And why would we bring that up right before we're ready to close? Another person writes in, and 10 kings must be in place before the final peace treaty. I don't know if that's true because it talks about the little horn arising and he's got to subdue 3. 7 submit, but he's got to subdue 3. And I'm not completely clear on the order of that. You know, is that between the rapture and the beginning of the 70th week? I need to do more study on that, so I'm not entirely sure.
Well, if it's Rahm Emanuel, that's going to be their crisis in which then they form the 10.
There you go.
Right? You know, when they have the rapture.
There you go. And one more says, well, I know that Trump is not our savior. The other choice would hasten more lawlessness in and around us personally, and to be more in danger should we not be raptured. My question is, when will Father God tell us, will tell his son to go get his bride? I am so weary of this world the way it is now. Unfortunately, in politics, you have to vote for the lesser of two evils. I'm of the view that the lesser of two evils is a real thing.
Yeah.
And I like what the person said. No candidate is our savior. But that's not to dissuade people from voting for the lesser of two evils. I've been voting for the lesser of two evils my whole life. Most of the times I show up and vote, I'm really not voting for somebody. I'm voting against the alternative. And so that's my take on it. Yours?
Well, you know, I hear the weariness. And, you know, last time I was encouraging everybody to stay firm and to also try to maintain our fellowship. And so
a lot of people wrote in and appreciated what you said.
And it could be that because this is something that's very distressing, that you go to the Lord and ask him, okay, what is it you want me doing right now? Because we know God wants us doing something until Jesus does come to get us. And so it could be that there are opportunities because people are so frightened and scared, to quote Mr. Soros, and that this is our opportunity to reach people that were unreachable until the last 5 months.
Yeah, I think we're having opportunities now because of COVID that we've never had before. We've watched our social media, YouTube, everything else, statistics skyrocket. We're having people show up at our church now just because there's no other church in town that's open. And they're getting under good teaching. So things are not falling apart, they're falling into place. And as severe as things get, Christ's promise is never abrogated that he's going to build his church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. We're going to sign off. I just want to make people aware of the fact that next week, the 21st, the following week, the 28th, we will not be here because of my traveling schedule, and we're scheduled to do Pastor's Point of View next September 4th. I would encourage folks to do something very simple. If you believe in what we are saying and you happen to be viewing this on Facebook, just click share. By doing that simple act, you multiply the influence of this ministry into your Facebook list, people that we can't normally get to or reach. And I would also encourage people to sign up for my YouTube channel. Just type Andy Woods into your YouTube search engine, and you shouldn't have any trouble finding it. Just hit subscribe, click the bell, and it's a free notification. And every time we upload something, you'll receive an immediate notification for it. This presentation is going to be uploaded onto YouTube momentarily after we get off the air. And I would just encourage people to stay close to the Lord and His Word, during these, and His people, as much as you can during these perilous times. Any closing thoughts? All right, well, we'll see you here, there, in the air. So God bless you.